This is Crazy Karen HOA. Let me set the scene fast. I am watching you. That was the first thing Virginia Harris said to me, and she did not whisper it. She leaned into my open window and yelled that she was timing me, and the longer I stalled, the more fees she could add. I had been parked in a guest spot at the Heights at Summit Ridge Community Association in Nashville for maybe 20 minutes, and I had a valid guest pass on my dashboard. I work as a restaurant supply rep and I drive a branded van, so I need guest parking when I visit my girlfriend who lives here. Virginia is the gate access administrator, which means she controls the codes and the guest pass system. And she has decided that guests cannot be residents even temporarily. She tapped her clipboard against my mirror and said the guest pass system was under review and I should have known better. I asked her what that meant, and she said it meant exactly what it sounded like. I pointed at the pass on my dashboard and she leaned in closer, close enough that I could smell her coffee, and said that pass could belong to anyone. I said it had my girlfriend's unit number on it, and she said that did not prove I was authorized today. She stepped back and pulled out her phone, and I realized she was calling someone. I asked who she was calling and she said a tow company, and if I had a problem with that I could take it up with the board. I got out of the van because I needed to see what she was writing on that clipboard. She turned her back to me and kept talking into her phone, and I heard her say the vehicle was abandoned in a guest spot with no visible authorization. I said that was a lie, and she held up one finger like I was interrupting an important call. She finished talking and turned around with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She said the truck would be here in 15 minutes, and I could either move now and accept a written warning, or I could stay and pay the tow fee plus the HOA administrative surcharge. I asked what the surcharge was, and she said it depended on how long I argued. She pulled a handheld radio off her belt and held it up like a weapon. She said she was also calling the front gate to flag my vehicle and make sure I could not use a guest code again without board approval. I asked if she was serious, and she said absolutely, and then she said something I will never forget. Make it public, I love watching people get embarrassed. She said it with a grin, and I knew right then that this was personal. I did not know why yet, but I knew. I had a custody exchange in 3 hours and I could not miss it. My ex-wife had already threatened to file a motion if I was late again, and I had a meeting with a client right after that could make or break my quarter. I could not afford to have my van towed, and I definitely could not afford to get blacklisted from this HOA because my girlfriend lived here and I visited twice a week. I told Virginia I would move the van, but I wanted her name and title in writing, and I wanted to know what rule I had violated. She laughed and said I could file a complaint if I wanted, but nobody ever did, because nobody wanted to deal with the paperwork. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I said I wanted her to repeat what she just said about the guest pass and the tow, and I wanted her to explain what rule I broke. She froze for a second, then her face went red, and she said I was harassing her and she was going to call security. I said she could call whoever she wanted, but I was standing in a legal parking spot with valid authorization, and she had just admitted she was towing me anyway. She said the authorization was not valid because the guest pass system was under review, and I said that was not a rule. She said it was an interim policy, and I said show me the policy in writing. She turned and walked toward the clubhouse and I followed her. I know that sounds stupid, but I wanted her to say more. I walked away on purpose, because I wanted her to follow and say more. She did not follow, but she did stop and turn around and yell that I was not a resident and I had no right to question her. She said the board gave her full authority over guest parking, and if I did not like it I could move somewhere else. I asked if she was saying this was personal, and she said it was compliance, and compliance was her job. I asked why she was targeting me specifically, and she said, "I know what you did." I had no idea what she was talking about. I had never spoken to her before today. I had visited my girlfriend dozens of times, and I had always used a guest pass and parked in guest spots, and I had never gotten a warning or a fine. I asked her what I supposedly did, and she said I could read the violation notice when it arrived. Then she said something that made my blood go cold. "You can be mad, or you can be compliant." She said it like she had said it 1,000 times before, like it was her personal motto. The tow truck pulled into the parking lot before I could respond. It was a wheel-lift truck with amber lights flashing, and the driver got out and walked straight to Virginia like they knew each other. She pointed at my van and said it was the white one in the guest spot, no authorization, owner refused to move. The driver looked at me and I held up my phone and said I was recording and the vehicle had a valid guest pass on the dashboard. He walked over to my van and looked through the windshield, and then he looked at Virginia and said he could see a pass. She walked over and looked, and her face went white. She said that was not there before. I said it had been there the entire time and she had lied to the tow company. The driver shrugged and said he was not getting in the middle of it, and if there was a pass he was not towing. Virginia said the pass was placed there after she called, and I was trying to deceive them. I said that was insane, and I had video of her leaning into my window and looking right at the dashboard. She said the video was edited, and it did not prove anything. The driver said he was leaving, and she grabbed his arm and said she would pay the trip fee out of pocket if he would just take the vehicle. He pulled his arm away and said he was not towing a vehicle with visible authorization, and he left. Virginia turned on me and said I had just made everything worse. She said she was filing a formal complaint for harassment and intimidation, and she was recommending the board pursue a trespass action. I asked on what grounds, and she said I was not a resident and I had no standing to be here. I said I was a guest of a resident and I had authorization, and she said authorization could be revoked at any time for cause. I asked what the cause was and she said interfering with HOA operations. I laughed because it was so absurd, and that made her angrier. She said I thought this was funny now, but I would not think it was funny when I got the fine notice. She walked back to the clubhouse, and I stood there trying to process what had just happened. I looked at the guest pass on my dashboard and I realized it was not in the same spot where I had left it. I always put it in the center of the dashboard right below the rearview mirror, but now it was pushed to the passenger side like someone had moved it. I looked around and saw a security guard hovering near the clubhouse door, watching me. I walked over to him and asked if he had seen anyone near my van in the last 30 minutes. He looked uncomfortable and said he was not supposed to talk to non-residents about security matters. I said someone moved my guest pass and tried to get my vehicle towed, and he said he did not see anything. I got back in my van and drove to my girlfriend's unit. She was home, and I told her what happened, and she went pale. She said Virginia had been harassing her for months, ever since she had filed a complaint about the guest pass system being confusing and inconsistently enforced. She said Virginia had started denying her guest codes without explanation, and when she complained to the board they said Virginia had full discretion. I asked if anyone else had complained, and she said yes, but the board always sided with Virginia. She said Virginia told her once that the rules were clear, and if she did not like them she could sell her unit and leave. My girlfriend showed me a folder of printed emails and notices. She had been keeping records because she knew something was wrong, but she did not know how to fight it. I looked through the emails and I saw a pattern. Virginia had been targeting anyone who questioned her or filed complaints, and she was using the guest pass system as a weapon. She would deny codes, revoke passes, call tow trucks, and then claim it was all about compliance. The board backed her up every time because they did not want to deal with the complaints themselves, and Virginia made sure the complaints never got organized. I asked my girlfriend if she had ever recorded Virginia, and she said no. I said I just did. And I had video of Virginia admitting the pass was there, and then lying to the tow driver. My girlfriend said that might not be enough, because the board would just say it was a misunderstanding. I said I had more than that. I had recorded Virginia saying this was personal, saying she loved watching people get embarrassed, and saying I know what you did even though I had never met her before. My girlfriend stared at me and said that could work, but we needed more. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmare tales. I spent the next 2 hours making calls. I called the tow company and confirmed they had a dispatch log showing Virginia requested a tow for a vehicle with visible authorization and the driver had refused. I called the HOA management company and asked for a copy of the guest pass policy, and they said it was handled by the board and I needed to submit a written request. I called the board president and left a message saying I had been harassed by the gate administrator and I wanted a meeting. Then I called my attorney, because I knew this was going to get worse before it got better. My attorney listened to the recording and said it was good, but not decisive. She said Virginia could claim she was talking about a different vehicle or a different policy, and the board could claim they had interim authority to modify parking rules. She said I needed to show a pattern of abuse, and I needed to show that Virginia was acting outside her authority. I said I could get that, and she said be careful because HOA boards have a lot of protection under Tennessee law, and they could drag this out for years if they wanted. I went back to the HOA parking lot that evening, because I wanted to see if Virginia was still there. She was not, but I saw the orange reflective markers still planted at the curb where she had put it. I took a photo of it, and I noticed there were 3 more markers scattered around the guest spots, like she was marking vehicles for towing. I walked around and checked the windshields, and I saw 2 other vehicles with guest passes that had been moved to the side just like mine. I took photos of those too, and I wrote down the plate numbers. I knocked on a few doors and asked if anyone had problems with Virginia or the guest pass system. The first 2 people said they did not want to get involved, but the third person, an older man in Unit 214, said he had a stack of violation notices and he was about to hire a lawyer. He said Virginia had called a tow truck on his daughter 3 times in 2 months, and each time the pass had been moved or covered. He said he complained to the board, and they told him his daughter needed to follow the rules. I asked if he had kept the notices and he said yes, and he went inside and came back with a folder thicker than my girlfriend's. I asked if I could make copies and he said I could take the whole folder because he had scanned everything. He said his name was Tom and he had lived here for 12 years, and Virginia had only started this campaign in the last 18 months. He said she used to be reasonable, but something changed and now she acted like she owned the place. I asked if he knew what changed, and he said the board gave her a title and a parking enforcement budget, and she started treating it like her personal fiefdom. He said other people had complained but nobody wanted to organize because Virginia had a reputation for retaliation. I heard a car pull into the lot, and I looked up and saw Virginia getting out of a black sedan. She saw me talking to Tom, and her face went tight. She walked straight toward us and said Tom was violating the no solicitation policy by talking to a non-resident about HOA business. Tom said I was his guest and he could talk to whoever he wanted. She said that was fine, but I needed to leave the property immediately or she would call the police for trespassing. I said I was standing in a common area and I had a right to be here as a guest. She pulled out her phone and said she was calling the non-emergency line right now. Tom said this was ridiculous and he was filing another complaint. Virginia said he could file whatever he wanted, but it would not change anything. Then she looked at me and said, "You can be mad, or you can be compliant." She said it with the same smug smile, and I knew she had no idea I was recording again. I had my phone in my shirt pocket with the camera pointed out, and I had been recording since I saw her car pull in. I did not say anything. I just smiled back, and that made her uncomfortable. She asked what I was smiling about, and I said nothing, just enjoying the evening. She walked back to her car and sat there watching us. Tom said I should leave before she actually called the cops, because the local police were used to HOA complaints, and they usually sided with whoever called first. I thanked him for the folder and I left, but I made sure to walk slowly and take my time. I wanted her to think I was not worried, because I was not. I had something she did not know about, and I was waiting for the right moment to use it. The next morning I got a certified letter from the HOA. It was a parking violation notice that read like a ransom note, with a deadline that made no sense. It said I had parked in a guest spot without authorization on the date of the tow incident, and I owed a $50 fine, plus a $25 administrative fee, plus a $15 notice fee, due in 10 business days, or the amount would double, and a lien would be filed. It also said my vehicle was banned from guest parking pending a compliance review, and any future violations would result in immediate towing and a $500 penalty. At the bottom it said the notice was issued by Virginia Harris, Gate Access Administrator, on behalf of the board. I called my attorney and read her the notice. She said it was legally shaky because they had not given me an opportunity to dispute the facts before imposing the fine, and the lien threat was probably not enforceable for a parking violation. She said I should send a formal dispute letter within 5 days, and I should request a hearing in front of the board. She also said I should file a complaint with the Tennessee HOA Ombudsman if the board did not respond. I said I would do all of that, but I also wanted to go on the offensive. She asked what I meant, and I said I wanted to show the board that Virginia was lying and abusing her authority, and I wanted to do it in a way they could not ignore. I spent the next week gathering evidence. I got copies of the tow dispatch logs from the tow company, and they showed Virginia had called them 6 times in the last 2 months for vehicles that all had visible guest passes. I got statements from 3 other residents who said Virginia had targeted them, and they all had the same story about passes being moved or covered. I got photos of the orange reflective markers that Virginia used to tag vehicles, and I matched them to the dates on the dispatch logs. I also got a copy of the actual guest pass policy from the management company, and it said nothing about interim reviews or administrator discretion to ban vehicles. I put everything into a binder with tabs and a table of contents, and I made copies for every board member. Then I did something my attorney told me not to do. I posted a summary on the neighborhood Facebook group and I asked if anyone else had been targeted by Virginia. Within 2 hours I had 40 comments, and within 6 hours I had over 100. People were furious. They had all been afraid to speak up individually, but now that they saw other people with the same story, they wanted blood. Virginia responded on the Facebook thread and said I was spreading misinformation and defaming her, and she was reporting the post to the moderators. Someone replied with a screenshot of a violation notice Virginia had sent them, and someone else replied with a photo of their guest pass that had been moved. Then, someone else posted a photo of Virginia placing an orange reflective marker on their vehicle while they were filming from their window. The thread exploded. The moderators tried to shut it down, but people kept reposting it, and within 12 hours it had been shared to 3 other Nashville HOA groups. The board president called me the next day and said they needed to meet. He said the Facebook situation was out of control, and they wanted to resolve this quietly before it got worse. I said I would meet with them, but I wanted my attorney present, and I wanted the meeting recorded. He said that was fine, and we scheduled it for the following Tuesday at the clubhouse. He also said Virginia would not be there because she had requested a leave of absence due to stress. I knew that was a lie. She had not requested anything. They had told her to stay away because she was a liability. I also knew they were going to try to settle this with a token gesture and a promise to review the policy, and then they would go back to business as usual. I was not going to let that happen. I had one more card to play, and I had been saving it for exactly this moment. The hearing was scheduled for 6 in the evening, and I showed up early with my attorney and my binder of evidence. The board was already there, 5 people sitting behind a folding table like it was a courtroom. The president introduced himself as Mark and said they appreciated me coming in to discuss this. I said I was not there to discuss anything. I was there to show them proof that Virginia had been abusing her authority and violating HOA rules, and I wanted them to take action. Mark said they took all complaints seriously and they had already started an internal review. I opened my binder and started walking them through the evidence. I showed them the tow dispatch logs, the resident statements, the photos of the moved guest passes, the photos of the orange reflective markers, and the copy of the actual guest pass policy that contradicted everything Virginia had been doing. I also played the recording of Virginia saying "make it public, I love watching people get embarrassed," and the recording of her saying "you can be mad or you can be compliant." The board members looked uncomfortable, and Mark said they would need time to review everything. I said they did not need time, they needed to admit that Virginia had been running a personal vendetta and the board had been enabling her. One of the board members, a woman named Sandra, said that was a serious accusation and I needed to be careful about making defamatory statements. I said everything I had just shown them was documented and verifiable, and if they did not take action, I would file a formal complaint with the state ombudsman, and I would also file a civil suit for harassment and abuse of authority. Mark said that was not necessary, and they were prepared to offer a resolution. He said they would waive my parking fine, and they would issue a clarification memo about the guest pass policy, and they would provide additional training for Virginia when she returned from leave. I said that was not good enough. I said I wanted Virginia removed from any role involving parking enforcement. I wanted a written apology, and I wanted the board to send a memo to all residents acknowledging that the guest pass policy had been misapplied. Sandra said that was not realistic because it would expose the HOA to liability. I said they were already exposed to liability because Virginia had been violating people's rights for 18 months, and they had done nothing. That was when I played the trump card. I pulled out my phone and I opened a second recording, one I had not mentioned yet. I said I had recorded Virginia 2 days after the tow incident, and I had been holding on to it because I wanted to see how the board would respond first. I hit play, and Virginia's voice filled the room. She was talking to someone on the phone, and she was saying that she knew I was dating a resident who had filed complaints, and she was going to make an example of me so other people would think twice before questioning her authority. She said it was personal, and she wanted to make sure I understood that the HOA was not a democracy. The room went silent. Mark looked at Sandra, and Sandra looked at the other board members. One of them, an older man named Richard, said this was a disaster, and they needed to consult with their attorney immediately. Mark said the meeting was over and they would be in touch. I said that was fine, but I was giving them 72 hours to respond before I posted the recording on the Facebook group and filed my complaint with the state. My attorney said we were also prepared to file a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and abuse of process, and we had multiple plaintiffs ready to join. We left, and I felt like I had just run a marathon. My attorney said I had done well, but she was worried the board would try to stonewall and drag this out. I said they would not, because they did not have the stomach for it. I was right. The next morning I got a call from Mark, and he said the board had met with their attorney and they were prepared to offer a settlement. He said they would waive all fines related to the parking incident. They would issue a written apology. They would remove Virginia from parking enforcement and reassign her to administrative tasks with no resident contact. And they would send a memo to all residents clarifying the guest pass policy. He also said they would implement a formal appeals process for parking violations. I said that sounded good, but I wanted it in writing, and I wanted the memo to include an acknowledgement that the policy had been misapplied. He said they could do that, but they wanted me to sign a release agreeing not to pursue further legal action. I said I would agree to that as long as the settlement included a firm no-contact directive for Virginia, meaning she could not communicate with me or my girlfriend for any reason, and if she did it would be grounds for immediate termination. He hesitated, and then he said they could add that. The settlement documents arrived 3 days later, and they were everything Mark had promised. I signed them and my attorney filed them with the management company. The board sent the memo to all residents the next day, and the Facebook group went wild. People were celebrating like they had just won a war, and in a way they had. Virginia's reign of terror was over, and the board had been forced to admit they had screwed up. But the story was not over yet. A week later, my girlfriend called me and said Virginia had just been escorted off the property by security. Apparently the board had received a stack of formal complaints from residents who had been emboldened by the memo, and the complaints included photos, recordings, and written statements. Virginia had tried to argue that she was just doing her job, but the board attorney told her she was done, and if she did not leave voluntarily they would pursue termination for cause. She left, and nobody saw her again. The neighborhood threw a small party at the clubhouse a few weeks later, and Tom was the one who organized it. He said it was a celebration of accountability, and he wanted to thank everyone who had spoken up. I went, and people kept coming up to me and shaking my hand like I was some kind of hero. I was not a hero, I was just someone who got mad enough to fight back, and I got lucky that I had recorded the right things at the right times. The best part came a month later, when I was visiting my girlfriend and I saw a new gate administrator in the parking lot. She was placing guest passes on windshields and handing out printed maps of the guest spots, and she was smiling and saying welcome to the community. I walked over and introduced myself, and she said she had heard about me. She said the board had hired her specifically to rebuild trust, and her first priority was making sure the guest pass system was transparent and fair. I said that sounded great, and she said if I ever had any problems I could call her directly. I never did have any more problems. I parked in guest spots dozens of times over the next year, and nobody ever questioned me. The orange reflective markers disappeared, and the tow trucks stopped circling the neighborhood like vultures. The board implemented the appeals process they had promised, and they hired a management company to handle parking enforcement instead of letting a single person run the show. It was not perfect, but it was better. I still think about Virginia sometimes, and I wonder if she learned anything. I doubt it. People like her do not change, they just find new places to exercise their little bit of power. But I also think about all the people who were too afraid to fight back. And I am glad I did. Not because I am brave, but because I was angry and I had the resources to do something about it. A lot of people do not have those resources, and they get steamrolled by HOAs every day. The funny thing is, I almost did not record that second conversation. I had been sitting in my van outside the clubhouse, waiting for my girlfriend to get home, and I saw Virginia walking to her car on the phone. I could hear her voice through my open window, and she was talking loud enough that I knew she wanted to be heard. I pulled out my phone and hit record, and I got the whole thing. If I had not done that, the board would have settled with a slap on the wrist and Virginia would still be terrorizing people. My attorney later told me that the recording was probably not admissible in court because Tennessee is a one-party consent state and I was not part of the conversation. But it did not matter. The board was not going to take it to court, they were going to settle, and the recording was enough to scare them into action. She also said I was lucky that Virginia had been so blatant about her intentions, because most HOA abuses are subtle and hard to prove. I said I did not feel lucky, I felt exhausted, and she laughed and said that was what justice felt like most of the time. The final twist came 3 months after the settlement, when I got a call from a lawyer I did not know. He said he was representing a group of residents who were filing a class action suit against the HOA for systematic abuse of parking enforcement, and he wanted to know if I would be willing to testify. I said I had signed a release and I could not pursue further legal action. He said the release only covered my personal claims, and I could still testify as a witness in someone else's case. I thought about it for a day, and then I said yes. The case is still pending, but I have heard through the neighborhood grapevine that the HOA attorney withdrew from the case after seeing the evidence packet. The board panicked because they had to answer homeowners with no cover, and they ended up settling with the plaintiffs for a significant amount. The settlement included a complete overhaul of the parking enforcement policy, the removal of 2 board members who had enabled Virginia, and a commitment to hire an independent compliance monitor for 3 years. It was more than I ever expected, and it was all because people finally stood up and said enough. I saw Tom at the grocery store a few weeks ago, and he said the neighborhood felt different now. He said people were not afraid anymore, and when someone had a problem they spoke up instead of hiding. He said that was the real victory, not the money or the policy changes, but the fact that the culture had shifted. I agreed with him, but I also said it should not have taken a fight to get there. He said that was true, but fights were sometimes the only way things changed. My girlfriend and I are still together, and she still lives in the neighborhood. She said she thought about moving after everything that happened, but she decided to stay because she did not want Virginia to win. I understood that. Sometimes staying is the hardest thing you can do, especially when someone has tried to make your life hell. But she stayed, and so did I, and we made it work. The guest pass system is simple now. You request a pass online, you print it out, you put it on your dashboard, and nobody bothers you. If there is a problem, you call the management company and they handle it professionally. It is what it should have been from the start, but it took a war to get there. That is the HOA life in a nutshell. The rules are supposed to protect everyone, but too often they become weapons in the hands of people who like having power over their neighbors. I still have the binder of evidence in my closet, and I still have all the recordings on my phone. I do not think I will ever need them again, but I keep them anyway, just in case. My attorney said I should keep them for at least 7 years, because that is the statute of limitations for most civil claims. I said I would probably keep them forever, because they remind me that fighting back is possible, even when it feels hopeless. The last time I drove through the neighborhood, I saw the curb where Virginia had planted that first orange reflective marker. It was gone, of course, but I still remembered exactly where it had been. I remembered the way she had leaned into my window and yelled, the way she had smiled when she called the tow truck, the way she had said, "You can be mad," or "You can be compliant," like it was some kind of universal truth. She was wrong, and I was glad I proved it. I learned a lot from that fight. I learned that HOAs have way too much power and way too little oversight. I learned that most people will not fight back because they are afraid of retaliation, and that fear is exactly what bullies count on. I learned that documentation is everything, and that recording conversations can save your life, as long as you do it legally. I learned that boards will almost always protect their own until the liability gets too big to ignore. And I learned that sometimes the only way to win is to make the fight so public and so expensive that the other side has no choice but to back down. But the biggest thing I learned is that you are not alone. When I posted that first message on the Facebook group, I thought maybe 2 or 3 people would respond. Instead, I got 100 responses, and every single one of them had a story like mine. They had been targeted, harassed, fined, towed, and humiliated, and they had all stayed silent because they thought they were the only ones. Once they realized they were not alone, everything changed. That is the power of community, even in a place where the HOA tries to control everything. Virginia never apologized, and I never expected her to. People like her do not apologize, they just move on to the next place where they can be in charge. But the board did apologize, in writing, and they admitted that the guest pass policy had been misapplied. That was enough for me. It was not about revenge, it was about accountability. It was about making sure that the next person who parked in a guest spot would not have to go through what I went through. The settlement included a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive, and that was the most satisfying part. Virginia was forced to retract her claim in writing, and the HOA attorney forced a reversal to reduce liability. The board had to send a memo to every resident explaining what had happened, and they had to include a copy of the actual guest pass policy. It was humiliating for them, and it was exactly what they deserved. The funny karma moment came a few weeks later when someone posted a photo on the Facebook group. It was a stack of complaints that had been sitting in a box in the HOA office. Complaints that Virginia had never processed. She had told people for months that nobody ever complained, and then this stack appeared and proved she had been lying the whole time. The board had to go through every single complaint and respond to every single person, and it took them months. Karen said nobody complains, and a stack of complaints appeared. It was perfect. I still drive my van through that neighborhood twice a week, and I still park in guest spots, and nobody says a word. The new gate administrator waves when she sees me, and sometimes she asks how my day is going. It is a small thing, but it matters. It means the neighborhood is not a place where normal life becomes a parking violation anymore. It is just a neighborhood, with rules that make sense and people who enforce them fairly. I have told this story to a lot of people, and the reaction is always the same. They shake their heads and say they cannot believe an HOA would do that, and I say you would be surprised. HOAs do this kind of thing every day, all over the country, and most of the time nobody fights back. I was lucky that I had the time, the resources, and the evidence to fight back. A lot of people do not have that, and they just eat the fines and move on. That is what Virginia was counting on, and that is why she kept doing it. But I did fight back, and I won, and that is why I am telling you this story. If you are dealing with an HOA that is abusing its power, you are not alone. Document everything, record everything, as long as it is legal in your state. Find other people who have been targeted, because I promise you they are out there. Do not be afraid to go public, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And do not back down, because bullies only stop when you make them stop. Take care, and I will see you next time.